She built with blistered hands and a breaking heart. Every nail driven into timber was a promise to her boy. But when her strength began to fail, a stranger offered more than help. He offered hope she didn't dare believe in. The hammer slipped, smacking hard against her thumb, and Clara Yates bit down on a scream sharp enough to split the morning air. Her whole body shook from the effort not to cry. But a cry would wake him, and Jacob needed sleep more than she needed a second hand. She shoved the bleeding thumb into her apron and picked up the hammer again with the other hand. The board had to go in today. The roof wouldn't hold through another storm, and that spring wind had already torn 3 shingles off the corner where her son's cot sat just beneath. If the rains came tonight, he'd wake shivering and coughing again, and she couldn't afford for the cough to come back. Not after what it did to him last winter. Not after the doctor said, "One more bout like that and his lungs won't keep up." Her grip faltered, the nail bent sideways, and still she didn't stop. No one else was going to finish this house for her. Matthew sure as hell hadn't, not when he'd left 2 years ago with a promise to send for them once he'd found something better west. Clara had waited 6 months before accepting that the something better didn't include her. She waited another year before taking what little silver she had and buying this scrap of land on the edge of Dry Creek with a half-built shack and a well that only ran in the spring. The house she was building now was meant to replace that shack. It had no floor yet, just packed dirt and a prayer, but it had walls and a roof nearly complete, and one small window Jacob liked to watch birds through in the early morning. It would be a home, not just a place to sleep, but she had to finish it. She had to. Behind her, the sound of tiny feet scuffing against packed earth made her turn. Jacob stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes still swollen from sleep. His small arms wrapped around his chest, and he shivered despite the quilt slung over his shoulders. "Mama," he whispered, his voice scratchy and barely there. "You're bleeding." Clara looked down. Blood had soaked through the cloth and was dripping in slow, stubborn streaks onto the porch floor. She forced a smile. "Just a little bump, honey. Go on back inside now, all right? It's too cold out here." But Jacob didn't move. He stared at the unfinished roof like he could see the holes waiting to let the sky in. "You shouldn't do it alone," he said, so soft it broke her in half. Clara's voice cracked before she could stop it. "There ain't anyone else." And that was the truth of it. The men in town looked at her like she was a riddle with no answer, a widow without a ring, a builder without a husband, a mother with too much pride to beg but too much love not to fight. She asked for help once, just once, and heard too many jokes about what a woman could offer in return. So no, she didn't ask again. She'd do it alone. For Jacob. She was still wiping blood from her thumb when she heard the crunch of hooves on gravel. A rider coming slow from the east. She squinted against the sun and saw a tall figure atop a weary bay, the kind of horse that had seen too many miles and not enough feed. The rider dismounted without hurry, his long coat dust-stained, his boots scuffed, his hat low over eyes she couldn't yet see. But something in his posture, calm but cautious, put her on edge. Clara stood straighter, shielding Jacob with her body. "You're on private land," she called, gripping the hammer like a weapon. The man paused just short of the porch. "Didn't mean to trespass," he said. His voice was low, deep, but gentle in a way that made her spine ache. "Just looking for water." Clara glanced past him at the well, barely a trickle even in good months. "Ain't much here." "Don't need much," he said, lifting a canteen. She nodded stiffly. "You can draw from the bucket." He moved toward the well, slow and deliberate, every step careful like he didn't want to spook her. Clara didn't relax, not when Jacob's breathing still rasped behind her, not when her hand throbbed like her bones were splintering. The man filled his canteen and drank. Then he looked back at her, finally lifting his head so she could see his face. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either, maybe late 30s, early 40s. A scar cut through one brow and his eyes were the color of wet stone, unreadable but not unkind. "Name S. Eli Mercer," he said after a pause. "I build things, mostly barns, sometimes fences, looking for work." Clara stared at him. Her thumb pulsed with pain. The roof behind her creaked in the wind. "I ain't hiring," she said. "Didn't figure you were," he replied, still not moving closer. "But I saw the hammer in your hand, and the blood." Jacob peeked around her again. Eli's eyes softened as he looked at the boy. "Just figured maybe you could use another pair of hands." The offer hung in the air like smoke. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Her pride was too loud, her fear louder. But Jacob coughed just once and she heard the crackle in it, like leaves breaking underfoot. And Clara Yates, who'd sworn to do it all alone, looked at the half-built house behind her and whispered, "You any good with wood?" Eli Mercer didn't smile, not really, but his mouth tugged just a little. "You let me show you." That's how he came to stay. Not with luggage or grand promises, but with a toolbox and a quiet patience that Clara didn't know how to breathe around. He slept in the barn the first night, on a bed of hay and splinters. She offered him coffee the next morning and nothing more. But by noon, he'd replaced the broken joist in the kitchen corner and reinforced the frame above Jacob's cot. By evening, the roof no longer groaned when the wind picked up. Jacob warmed to him fast. He asked questions Eli never seemed bothered to answer. "Why don't you talk much? Did you ever fight in the war? Do you miss your mom?" Clara braced herself every time, but Eli only answered what he wanted, always gentle, always just enough. On the third night, lightning split the sky. Rain came hard and fast, pounding the roof like fists. Clara sat awake beside Jacob's cot, ready to shield him from leaks. But the roof held. Not a single drop fell inside. The next morning, Clara found Eli already at work, hammering new boards along the east wall. "You don't have to do all this," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "I know." "Then why?" He paused, hammer halfway raised. "Because every board you nailed was for him," he said, nodding toward the window where Jacob sat drawing shapes in the fogged glass. "Figured maybe it was time someone helped you carry the rest." And just like that, something in her chest broke open. But not everything softens with kindness. That same day, the sheriff rode out from town, dust trailing behind him like a threat. He dismounted without a word and looked Eli over hard. "You working for her?" the sheriff asked. Eli nodded once. "You know she's got no claim to that land. Not yet anyway. No title, no deed." Clara stiffened. "I paid for it." "With what? Your wedding ring." Eli stepped between them before she could spit something back. "You here for trouble?" he asked the sheriff. "Just here to remind her the law still matters," the sheriff said, mounting again. "Word is her husband had debts, bad ones. That land might not stay hers for long." And then he rode off, leaving dust and silence in his wake. That night Clara didn't sleep. Neither did Eli. The house was stronger now, but something darker had settled between its walls, something they'd both have to face. Clara didn't ask questions the next morning, not about the sheriff or the debts, or what Eli thought they should do. She just brought him coffee and bread, same as always, set it down on the porch railing where he worked trimming window frames with a hand plane so steady it looked like he was peeling back time itself. The sun hadn't yet crested the ridge, and mist hung low along the fence line. Jacob slept in late, his cough finally easing after 3 nights without leaks, but Clara's stomach coiled with every gust of wind that swept through the valley. The house felt stronger, sure, but the world outside it suddenly felt more fragile than ever. She watched Eli work for a long moment, then quietly picked up a brush and went back to staining boards for the loft ladder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. That morning silence said enough. We're still here, we're still building, we're not giving up yet. By mid-morning, the sound of hooves returned. Not thunderous like a posse or urgent like a messenger, slow and measured. Clara stood stiffly at the corner of the porch, her brush still dripping in hand, heart pounding against her ribs. Eli looked up from his work, squinted into the sun, and set his tools down without a word. From behind the trees emerged a wagon, narrow, weather-beaten, and drawn by a single mule that looked older than sin. A man sat in the driver's seat, bones thin beneath a coat too big and patched with care. He tipped his hat as he approached, and his voice came dry as bark. "Name, S. Silas Green. Heard a woman out here was building something bigger than a grave." Clara blinked. "You heard wrong," she replied cautiously. "I'm just putting up a roof." "Same thing, depending how you look at it." Eli stepped forward. "What brings you here, Mr. Green?" Silas reached behind the seat and pulled up a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Used to be a sawyer. Before my legs gave out. Got tools collecting dust and no sons to hand 'em to. Figured someone else might make better use." Clara stared. The bundle was heavy with age, but the glint of iron peeked through in places. Chisels, clamps, hand-forged nails. Not new, but well cared for. Priceless in their world. "I can't pay you," Clara said. "Didn't ask you to." Silas gave a wheezing chuckle. "Just thought I'd like to know some part of me kept building even after I'm gone. You look like someone who finishes what she starts." He left the bundle on the porch and rode off before she could find words to thank him. Just a trail of dust and a warm ache in her chest. She turned to Eli, stunned. He bent down, unwrapped the tools, and ran his fingers over the wooden handles like they were heirlooms. "That's faith," he murmured. "Not charity. A man doesn't part with his tools unless he believes in what they'll build." The rest of the day passed in steady rhythm. Eli framed the loft and began laying floorboards while Clara helped cut railing posts. Jacob, feeling better, drew pictures in the dirt beside the porch. The tools Silas had left behind felt like a blessing and a challenge, to do them justice, to keep going. But by sundown, another shadow returned. Clara spotted the rider before Eli did, this one younger, meaner. His horse foamed at the mouth from the hard ride, and he swung down before the dust even settled. A pistol sat on his hip, shiny and idle but too visible for comfort. "Name's Myron Crow," the man said, tossing a badge in Eli's direction. "Hired by the bank to settle old scores." Eli didn't blink. "You're far from town." "Yeah, well, when a man dies owing more than he's worth, someone's got to pay the balance." He turned to Clara, his eyes cold. "Your husband left quite the ledger, miss, and this land, far as the bank's concerned, was never truly yours." Clara stepped forward, shoulders squared. "He abandoned us. I've built every inch of this place with my own hands." "Don't much matter to the paper," Myron said, shrugging. "I got 2 weeks to settle it, and I'm giving you one. After that, well, structures without legal claim are subject to removal." Eli's jaw tightened. "You threatening a mother and her child?" Myron smiled. "I'm reciting policy." He left without another word, but his presence lingered like smoke. Clara didn't go inside for a long time. She just stood there on the porch, hands clenched around nothing, watching the sky bleed orange and red and then black. Later that night, when Jacob was asleep and the house was quiet except for the gentle creak of settling lumber, Clara sat across from Eli at the kitchen table. Her voice came low, barely above a whisper. "I can't lose this." "You won't." "I don't have a deed. I don't even have the receipt anymore. I buried it with my wedding ring." Eli didn't flinch. He reached across the table and set something down between them, a small square of folded canvas. Clara opened it slowly. Inside, a roll of government contracts. His name signed on each one in clean, precise ink: builder, carpenter, supervisor. "I've built courthouses," he said. "Barns, jails, schoolhouses, places the government still cares about. That kind of signature still means something." Clara looked up, eyes wide. "You think you can buy me time?" "I think I can prove this house matters," he said. "That it's a community project, shared labor. I think if we make enough noise, someone'll listen." Her lip trembled. "And if they do?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Then I reckon I'll still be standing here, hammer in hand. You won't face him alone." She didn't cry. Not then. but her fingers brushed his across the table and held on a little longer than she meant to. The days that followed were a blur of sweat and sawdust. Neighbors who'd once kept quiet began drifting up the trail, one by one. A boy from town brought a sack of nails. An old woman delivered soup and told Jacob stories while Clara and Eli worked. Even the pastor came, bringing old hymnals to use as insulation in the walls. Might as well have God in there too. Word spread, not fast but steady. This wasn't just a woman building a house anymore. It was a community raising something up in the face of greed, and that changed things. But Myron Crow wasn't the type to back down easy. Exactly 1 week after his visit, he returned. He came at dusk, his horse kicking up gravel, his coat flapping like a warning. He didn't announce himself, just rode up to the house and dismounted. Eli met him in the yard. Myron's eyes scanned the new railing, the finished loft, the townspeople gathered by the porch. His voice was a sneer. "You think all this makes a difference?" Eli stepped forward. "I think it makes enough." Myron reached into his coat and pulled a document, flinging it toward Clara. "Foreclosure. Final." Clara stared at the paper. Her hands shook. Eli took it, read it, and smiled. A tight, bitter smile. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Myron said. And just then Jacob stepped out from the house, dragging behind him a piece of wood he'd carved himself. It was rough, crooked, barely a birdhouse, but he held it like treasure. He walked right up to Myron and said, "My mama built me a house. Why are you trying to take it?" The silence was suffocating. Myron looked at the boy. For a moment, something in his face twitched. Then he turned, got on his horse, and rode away. But nobody relaxed, not yet. Clara turned to Eli. "What now?" "We finish faster," he said. "We make it loud. We make it known. And we make sure if he comes back, he won't just be fighting us. He'll be fighting everyone who saw this house rise from the dust." Clara looked around at the porch full of faces, the roof above her head, the boy beside her, and for the first time in years, she believed she wasn't building alone. The sun rose behind a wall of gray the next morning, not quite cloudy, not quite clear, like the sky itself hadn't made up its mind. But Clara had. She was up before the rooster crowed, boots already laced, apron tied tight, and eyes set hard on the rafters she and Eli would finish framing by day's end. She moved like a woman possessed, like every strike of the hammer might drive back fate itself. And maybe it could. Maybe if she moved fast enough, worked hard enough, stacked board on board with enough force and will, she could bury the threat Myron Crow had left hanging in the air like smoke. But fear doesn't vanish just because you hammer over it. It sinks deep, hiding in corners until something, or someone, pulls it out again. Jacob's fever came back that night. Not high, not raging, just a slow, simmering heat that crept into his skin and made his breath wheeze low and tight. Clara noticed it when he didn't eat his supper, just picked at the bread and soup with quiet fingers, his eyes glassy and far off. When she touched his forehead, her blood went cold. "He's burning," she whispered. Eli came over without a word, kneeling beside the cot. His hand was cooler, steadier. He felt Jacob's pulse, checked his breathing, then met Clara's eyes. "It's not bad yet," he said gently, "but we can't let it get worse." Clara's hands were already shaking. "He can't fight another one, Eli. He doesn't have the lungs for it." "We'll keep him warm, fluids, rest. You just stay with him tonight, I'll keep the fire going." Clara sat by Jacob's side the whole night, damp cloths and whispered lullabies, while Eli fed logs into the fire like he was burning time itself, trying to keep the darkness from swallowing them whole. Every few hours, Jacob stirred, murmuring soft nonsense, calling for his papa once, and then Clara had to bite her tongue not to scream. She hated Matthew for what he'd left behind, hated him for making her face this alone. But she hated herself more for the part of her that still ached when Jacob said his name. By dawn, the fever had broken, just a little, just enough, and Jacob's breathing evened out. Clara hadn't slept, but she smiled through the tears when he opened his eyes and asked if the birds were still outside. She told him they were, told him they'd never left. Eli made breakfast that morning, thin oats and strong coffee, and didn't ask any questions when Clara didn't eat. He just kept building, reinforcing the east wall, installing the narrow stairs to the loft, hammering through his worry the only way he knew how. Word had spread further than either of them realized. By noon, 2 more men arrived from town. One a blacksmith named Harris who brought a cart of nails, hinges, and window latches. The other a widower named Tom who'd heard about the woman with the hammer and came offering fence posts and a strong back. Clara was too tired to make sense of it, but Eli stepped in, nodding, delegating, giving quiet instruction like a man used to running a crew. He'd once overseen construction for the army. He told them, back when orders came from Washington and buildings had to stand against more than weather. You build it right, he said, or people die. No one questioned him after that. By evening the frame was done. The walls stood straight and square. The roof no longer sagged. The windows were in and the door finally had hinges instead of rope. The house was more than wood now. It was defiance. It was proof. But proof doesn't scare men like Myron Crow. He came back on the 4th day with 2 others, strangers, armed, wearing badges that looked official but weren't. And this time, he didn't bother with polite warnings. He dismounted and walked straight to the porch, boots loud on the boards. Clara had stained herself. "This ain't legal," he said, holding out another paper, "and neither are you." Clara stood tall, hammer still in hand. "I got 100 witnesses say otherwise." "You got squat," he snapped. "You think a bunch of farmers and housewives scare the bank. They'll tear this place down the second I file the order." Eli stepped forward slowly, not without a court writ. "I got a judge in my pocket." "Then empty it." The tension cracked like a whip. Myron's hand drifted toward his gun, not fast but not slow either. Clara felt her stomach knot. The 2 men behind him flinched, waiting for a cue, but Eli didn't move, didn't blink, just stared him down like a man with nothing left to lose and no intention of backing away. "You fire that gun," Eli said evenly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure every man in this valley hears your name as the coward who shot a builder over a house made of kindness." One of the men behind Myron shifted uneasily. The other looked down at the ground. Clara saw it, that flicker of doubt, that sliver of hesitation. It was enough. Myron growled low and backed off. "You're gonna regret this," he said, "every one of you." He mounted up, spat into the dirt, and rode away with his shadows trailing behind. That night the porch was full again. Neighbors brought food, tools, cloth for curtains. Someone brought a fiddle and played a song that made Jacob smile from his cot. The house glowed from the inside out, firelight, laughter, music, and something more. "Hoping." Clara stood in the doorway, Eli beside her, and whispered, "I don't know how we keep this." "We don't," he said. "We earn it again every day." The next morning, the real law arrived. Sheriff Malin, an older man with tired eyes and too many regrets, rode up just after dawn. He didn't come with threats. He came with questions. Eli handed over his contracts. Clara gave her account. The neighbors vouched one after another, and by afternoon the sheriff rode back toward town with a new story to tell, and more importantly, a promise. No one touches that house unless a court says otherwise, and I don't see any judge riding up that trail. Still, Eli didn't relax. That night, after the porch emptied and Jacob finally fell asleep again, Clara stepped out to find him sitting on a stool beneath the stars, carving something into a scrap of pine. She sat beside him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You never said why you really came," she said. He didn't look up, didn't think it mattered. "It does now." Eli set the carving down, a little hoarse, rough but solid. "I lost someone, years ago, a little boy. He'd have been about Jacob's age now." Clara's breath caught. I ran from everything after that, he continued. Built for other people, tried to forget. But then I saw you here, building something that mattered, fighting when no one else would. And I realized maybe I could still build something worth staying for. Clara's hand found his. They didn't speak after that. Just sat there as the wind passed over the hills, not cold anymore, just steady, like time itself was holding its breath. Inside, Jacob stirred in his sleep. And beneath their feet, the boards held strong. 3 days passed without a word from Myron Crow, and each hour stretched longer than the last. Not because the work slowed, if anything, it sped up, but because waiting for the next knock, the next ride up the hill, the next threat was like standing on a frozen lake in spring, hearing the cracks beneath and not knowing which step would send everything under. And yet, Clara didn't stop. She couldn't. Not with Jacob sleeping soundly through the night for the first time in weeks. Not with the walls sealed and the floor warm beneath his feet. Every stroke of the brush, every board sanded, every hinge screwed in tight, it wasn't just labor, it was armor. The morning Eli brought the windowsills inside, Clara had already been up for hours, sweeping the kitchen and baking what little flour they had left into a flat loaf that smelled like something close to peace. Jacob sat on the floor with a pile of pine shavings, shaping them into animals with careful, crooked fingers. Eli set down the wood, rolled up his sleeves, and joined her at the table. His eyes looked more tired than usual. "Something wrong?" she asked, cutting the loaf in half. He hesitated. "Got a letter yesterday. One of the riders from town dropped it off while you were down at the creek." Clara stilled. "From who?" "My brother." Eli didn't meet her gaze. "We haven't spoken in years, not since the boy passed." Clara waited. "He heard I was out here, said he's headed west and figured we might cross paths. Wants to meet, tomorrow." "Will you?" Eli looked toward the window where light poured in through the unfinished frame. "I don't know, I left that life behind. This," he trailed off, but she understood. This wasn't just a stop for him, it was the first place he'd stopped running. "You should go," she said gently, "at least to see if it feels like something worth facing." Eli nodded slowly, but there was tension in the way his fingers curled around the cup. That night the wind shifted, warm but thick, like something was coming. Clara stood on the porch long after Jacob had gone to sleep, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watching the trees sway. She didn't hear the rider until the hooves hit the gravel, and when she turned, her heart dropped into her stomach. It was Myron Crow this time. It was Matthew. He rode up like nothing had passed between them, like 2 years of silence and debt and abandonment could be erased by a saddle and a slick grin. His coat was newer, his face cleaner, but his eyes, they were still full of excuses. "Well, would you look at this?" he said, sliding off the horse. "You really did it." Clara didn't move. "Why are you here?" "Came to see what my investment built." "It wasn't your investment." "I bought this land." "You left us, you left Jacob." Matthew's smile flickered. "I came back, did I?" The door creaked open behind her. Eli stepped out, arms folded, eyes unreadable. Matthew's gaze shifted to him and his tone turned sharp. "And who's this?" "Man who helped build what you abandoned." Matthew stepped closer. "So this is what you've become, taking help from strangers, playing house with some drifter." Clara didn't flinch. "He stayed, you didn't." "You always were good at rewriting things to suit you," Matthew muttered. "I didn't come to argue. I came to tell you I've settled the debt, paid off the bank." Clara blinked. "Why?" "Because I want what's mine, this land, this house." "This house was built with hands that don't belong to you anymore." "But the land still does. You never filed the claim, Clara. I did. You've got nothing legal holding this together." Behind her, Eli stepped down from the porch. "She's got a community," he said, "and if you think they'll stand by while you rip this out from under her, you haven't been listening." Matthew sneered. I've got a deed, I've got money, what have you got? Eli didn't blink, a reputation and a town behind her. Matthew's jaw worked for a second. You've got one day, he said, turning back to Clara. Pack what's yours, I won't ask again. He rode off, and for a long moment neither Clara nor Eli moved. Then she turned, walked inside, and sat at the table with her head in her hands. The floor felt too still, the walls too quiet. Jacob came in, rubbing his eyes. Mama. She looked up, heartbreaking. Go back to sleep, baby. Is he staying? Clara didn't answer. The next morning, Eli was gone. No note, no boot prints, just absence. Clara stared at the empty stool near the hearth and felt something cave in. She distrusted him. She'd let her guard down. And just like Matthew, just like everyone else, he disappeared when things got hard. But the truth came late that afternoon. Sheriff Malen rode up the trail again, carrying a folded piece of paper and a look of disbelief. Where's Mercer? He asked. Clara blinked. Gone. Gone? He rode into town this morning, filed a petition with the land office and bought the title outright. Said he had back pay from government contracts. He signed it over to you. Clara stared, mouth open. He said the house was yours, fair and clear. He left before I could thank him. That night she found the carving on the porch railing. A bird, wings outstretched, mid-flight. She didn't cry, not until Jacob woke and saw it, touched it, and whispered, "He left this for us, didn't he?" She nodded. But morning had more waiting. Eli came back. Dusty, tired, quiet as always. He walked up like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just given her everything. You didn't have to, she began. I did. You gave away everything. I gave it where it mattered. Clara reached for him then. No words, no permission, just her hand in his and a soft, quiet ache that said stay. And Eli Mercer stayed. But peace doesn't come without price. Later that week, a fire sparked in the valley. Dry brush caught fast, whipped by wind, flames rushing toward homes and fields. Clara was the first to see the smoke. She woke Eli, roused the neighbors. They fought it together, buckets, blankets, anything they had. Jacob stood on the porch clutching the bird carving, whispering to it like a prayer. At one point, Eli vanished into the smoke. Clara's heart stopped. But he returned dragging a boy from a burning barn. His face black with soot, hands blistered, eyes raw but alive. They lost one home that night, a neighbor's barn, but the houses stood. The community stood. And when dawn broke over blackened fields, Clara turned to Eli and said, "This is what you built." He shook his head. "No, this is what we built." And beneath their feet, the boards held strong, warped by fire but still standing. The days after the fire smelled of ash and sweat and stubborn hope. The earth was scorched in patches and damp in others, littered with footprints and pale dents, and the charred remains of a fence that had once stood between Clara's land and the empty acres beyond. But the house was still there, standing, strong. Every board blackened around the edges now seemed less like damage and more like proof of survival, of grit, of hands that refused to let go. Clara stood at the edge of the field with her skirts hitched and boots caked in mud, watching Eli lift a singed beam off a neighbor's tool shed. His back was bare in the morning sun, scarred down one shoulder from where the heat had licked him the night before. She hadn't asked how bad it hurt. He hadn't said. That was their way, never demanding answers they weren't ready to give. But something had changed between them. Not just in the way they spoke, quieter now, less urgent, but in the pauses, in the silences that stretched without discomfort. They hadn't kissed. They hadn't touched beyond hands brushing as they passed tools, but Clara felt something building under her ribs, something steady as a heartbeat, and it terrified her as much as it comforted her, because it meant this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It meant she wanted more. And more was dangerous, especially when it could be taken. Community came together faster than anyone expected, rebuilding sheds, replanting scorched gardens. But amid the efforts and the small kindnesses, the threat of Matthew's return still hovered like smoke that never truly cleared. The deed was now in Clara's name, thanks to Eli's sacrifice, but men like Matthew didn't respect paper unless they held it. And Clara knew him. Knew the slick, performative charm, the way he wore guilt like a borrowed coat, only to take it off the second no one was watching. He'd be back, not because he loved Jacob, not because he wanted the land, but because he hated losing control. Eli must have sensed it too, because he began working longer hours, reinforcing the doorframe, adding a second bolt, helping Clara reinforce the cellar with dried food, water, and firewood. "Just in case," he said when she asked, but his eyes didn't blink when he said it. Clara didn't argue. She just hammered alongside him, fingers blistered, breath short, and heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. She told herself it was precaution. She told herself it was routine. But she didn't sleep that night. The knock came the next evening. Not a heavy bang, not a subtle scrape. Just 3 precise, deliberate raps against the door as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the sky in fire. Clara reached for the handle. Eli beat her to it. Matthew stood there with a bottle in one hand and a canvas bag in the other. No horse, no dust, just him, clean-shaven, smiling, as if this was all some casual visit to an old friend. "You gonna invite me in?" he asked. Eli didn't move. "No." Clara stepped beside him. "You're not welcome here." Matthew's smile twisted. "Well, that's mighty ungrateful of you, considering I paid for this land once. You gave it away the moment you left your son freezing in a one-room shack," Eli said. Matthew ignored him. "I've been thinking," he said, shifting the bottle in his hand. "Maybe I was hasty, maybe we all were. Things got hard, sure, but I came back. That's gotta count for something." "It doesn't," Clara said quietly. "I want to see Jacob." "No. I'm his father. You're the man who left." Matthew's jaw tensed. "You don't get to rewrite history just because some carpenter wandered through and hammered his way into your bed." Eli stepped forward. "Leave." But Matthew didn't. He dropped the bottle into the dust and let it roll. "You really think this is going to last? You think a woman who was abandoned once ain't going to get abandoned again? Better to be abandoned than shackled to a man who only shows up when he wants to prove he still matters," Clara snapped. Matthew's voice dropped. "You'd let him raise my son." Clara's voice dropped lower. "Jacob chose him." That landed harder than a slap. Matthew's face twisted, not with pain but with insult, like he'd been robbed of something he didn't earn. He looked past her into the house, at the toys scattered near the hearth, at the fresh beams holding up the roof, at the evidence that life had continued and flourished without him. He turned without another word. But Clara wasn't fooled. "You'll come back," she said softly, mostly to herself. And he did. The next night the barn burned. Clara saw the glow first, red against the trees, and screamed Eli's name. They ran barefoot into the yard as flames roared through the beams, swallowing hay and tools and half the woodpile before they could even reach it. Buckets did nothing. Blankets scorched. All they could do was drag what they could from the blaze and watch it collapse. Jacob sobbed as the fire crackled, not for the barn but for the horse that wasn't there, had been traded last fall for supplies, and for the loss he didn't fully understand, for the fear, the smoke, the feeling of something precious gone forever. Clara sat with him in the dirt, holding him as he cried, her own tears hot against her face. They didn't sleep that night. Eli didn't either. He stood in the yard until the last ember died, until the barn was nothing but a black skeleton against the sky. And then, without a word, he picked up his axe and began chopping the last of the standing pine near the fence. Not for revenge, not for fury, but for rebuilding. because that's who he was. The sheriff came in the morning, walking the scorched earth in silence. He didn't ask who did it. He knew. He just said, if Crow's got it in his head to take more, he won't stop until someone stops him first. Clara said nothing. But Eli spoke, I'm not going anywhere. The sheriff nodded, then neither am I. The days blurred again. They built another shelter, smaller but strong, stacked what was salvaged, began again. The neighbors helped without being asked. Food came in quiet baskets, tools appeared on the porch. And Jacob, he painted. With scraps of charred wood and leftover whitewash, he began covering the side of the house with shapes, stars, birds, trees, his name in crooked letters. Eli helped him outline it. Clara watched, heart cracking and mending all at once. But beneath all that beauty, the fear remained. And it came back one last time. It was dusk again when Matthew returned. This time he didn't come alone. 2 men rode with him, faces covered, rifles slung low. Eli stepped out, hammer still in hand, and Clara grabbed the shotgun from above the door. Jacob stayed inside. Matthew didn't smile this time. He didn't speak. Just dismounted, motioned to the men, and stepped toward the porch. Don't, Clara said. You think you scare me, he hissed. You think a badge, a builder, a child's painting is enough to stop me. Eli stepped between them. Try. Matthew raised his hand. The rifleman aimed. And then a shot rang out, not from the house. From the trees. One of the men dropped his gun and yelped. The townsfolk emerged like ghosts from the woods. Dozens, some armed, most not, but all of them standing tall. You'll ride out, Sheriff Mullen said, stepping from behind a tree. Now, or we'll carry you. Matthew paled. He turned. He left. This time for good. That night Clara didn't cry. She just sat beside Jacob, watching the fire, Eli's hand in hers. Not everything had been saved. But nothing had been lost that couldn't be built again. The house was quiet in the days that followed, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from fear. It was the quiet of a wound beginning to close, of a home that had survived fire and fury and was still, somehow, standing. Clara moved slower now, not from weariness but from reverence. Each morning she swept the ashes off the porch with care, as though every ember left behind was part of something sacred. Not what they'd lost, but what they hadn't. Jacob returned to his painting. Birds with wings too large for their bodies, stars with too many points. He added a sun to the side of the house, blazing orange and yellow against the pale clapboards. Eli fixed the roofline where smoke had warped the shingles and replaced the latch on the cellar door with one he carved himself. Clara caught herself humming as she stirred stew over the fire, the same song her mother used to sing when she didn't think anyone was listening. Somehow, it felt right again. But healing, real healing, doesn't announce itself. It comes in fragments, in moments you don't recognize as miracles until later. Like when Jacob stopped coughing in his sleep. Or when Eli took Clara's hand not out of necessity, not to lead or steady, but just to hold it. Or when Clara, with sleeves rolled and hair falling loose, looked at the ridge and said, I want to plant something. The spring had crept in slow, timid after the blaze, but it was here now. And so they planted. Clara and Eli turned the earth together, brown fingers digging deep into soil that had once been frozen and then scorched, now warm again, rich with promise. Jacob followed behind them, dropping seeds into little pockets, whispering things under his breath that Clara didn't ask him to explain. Rows of beans, a patch of carrots, tomatoes if the weather held. It wasn't much, but it was something. A garden like a house, like a life, could start with almost nothing. They worked like that for days. Each afternoon, neighbors passed by to wave or drop off scraps, cloth, wire, a jar of plum preserves. No one mentioned Matthew Crow. No one needed to. He was gone, for now. And even if he came back, he'd never come alone again. That part of the world of Clara's world was over. One evening, Clara sat on the porch with her sewing, needles slipping in and out of Jacob's worn shirt while Eli sanded a doorframe beside her. The sound of the rasp, steady and soft, blended with Jacob's voice as he read aloud from a tattered book, stumbling through the harder words, stubborn as ever. And Clara felt something unexpected. Stillness. Not the stillness of waiting, not dread, but presence. Like for once in her life she wasn't clinging to the past or bracing for what might come. She was here, with her son, with this man, with a house that didn't fall even when fire tried to break it. It wasn't peace. Not entirely, but it was as close as she'd ever come. She looked at Eli. You ever think of leaving? He paused, looked up, then back at his work. Used to every day. And now? He set the rasp down. Now I think about building a second room, something bigger, maybe a loft for Jacob. Clara didn't answer right away. She just smiled, eyes damp in the corners. That night Jacob woke from a dream. Not a nightmare, he wasn't screaming, but restless, eyes wide, breath quick. Clara knelt beside his bed and stroked his hair. What is it, sweetheart? He looked at her like he was seeing something far away. I think Papa's still watching. Clara's throat tightened. From where? Jacob pointed toward the stars, out the window. Does that scare you? She asked gently. He shook his head, not anymore. And then, just like that, he fell back asleep. Clara sat there long after he'd gone still again, staring at the sliver of moon through the window. She didn't know if Matthew watched anything but his own shadow, but she knew Jacob believed it, and that was enough. Sometimes the stories we carry are more powerful than the facts we try to forget. 2 mornings later, Clara woke before sunrise and found Eli already outside. He stood near the fence line, shovel in hand, eyes fixed on the field where the barn had once stood. The wind had shifted again, brisk and smelling faintly of rain. He didn't turn when she joined him. Storm's coming, he said. She nodded. We've had worse. He handed her the shovel. Then let's build a place that doesn't break. They broke ground on a new barn that day, smaller than the last one but better planned. Clara wanted it low and sturdy with thick beams and stone anchors. I don't want it to burn like paper, she said. Eli smiled and promised it wouldn't. This time they dug deeper, laid every plank with care. Neighbors came to help again. Children ran between piles of lumber. Someone brought a jug of lemonade. Someone else played a harmonica. And Clara realized suddenly that the house she'd built had become a village, one nail at a time. But then something shifted again. A rider came up the hill, not one they knew. A boy, no more than 16, pale and breathless. He handed Clara a letter and said, "He told me to bring this straight to you." Clara unfolded it. Her stomach dropped. The letter wasn't from Matthew. It was from his new wife, a woman named Tessa Crow. She wrote in short, clipped lines, but the meaning was clear. Matthew had died. A fever had taken him down fast, sudden. No one had seen it coming. No one could stop it. He'd left behind debts, bad deals, a trail of broken contracts, and a child, a girl. 3 years old. I don't want her raised in that house, Tessa wrote. I can't give her what she needs, but I heard about you, about your boy, about your house. If you'll take her, I'll bring her. If not, I'll find another way. Clara read it twice, then sat on the porch and stared at the dirt for a long time. Eli came to stand beside her. What will you do? She didn't answer right away. But Jacob did. He stood in the doorway, eyes bright, and said, "She can have my room." Clara met Eli's eyes and nodded. Tessa arrived 3 days later with a child in her arms. The girl was small, silent, with curls so dark they almost looked blue in the sun. She didn't cry when handed over. She didn't smile either, just clung to Clara's dress like she already knew something about holding on. They named her June. That night, Clara lay awake between the steady breaths of two sleeping children and the quiet sound of Eli carving something on the porch again. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. She knew. The family had grown. The board still held. And morning would come. June didn't speak for the first week. Not a word. She clung to Clara's skirts like her life depended on it, watching everything with wide, solemn eyes. She flinched when the wind slammed the shutters. She didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't even hum like other children did when lost in thought. She just watched. The only time she showed any sign of comfort was when Jacob, sweet, patient Jacob, placed his little blue bird carving in her lap. She touched it gently, like it was something rare and breakable, and after that she followed him instead. Clara watched the two of them from the porch, heart aching in ways she hadn't expected. Not just for June's grief, though that was sharp and familiar, but because she recognized something in the way the girl looked at the world, a quiet ache, like someone who had already learned not to trust that anything good could last. It took Clara years to unlearn that lesson, and now she had to teach this girl something different. "I don't know if I can do this again," she said one night, voice low, fingers tangled in her apron. She was speaking to the wind, but Eli answered anyway. "You already are." They stood under a sky splashed with stars. Jacob was asleep by the hearth. June lay curled at the foot of his bed, hands tucked under her chin like a kitten afraid of being noticed. The house was warm and still and quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. "I keep wondering what her mother was thinking," Clara said softly, "leaving her here like that, just handing her off." Eli's voice was steady. She knew she was giving her a better chance. Clara nodded slowly. "I hated Matthew for so long, and then he goes and dies, leaves her, leaves us." Eli didn't reply right away. "People don't always make sense, Clara, but they leave behind what they leave behind. It's up to us what we do with it." That night Clara sat beside June until she drifted off. When the girl began to stir, breath catching in what might have been the start of a nightmare, Clara laid a hand on her back and began to hum, soft and low, the same song her mother used to sing. June didn't cry, but she pressed closer. The next morning, June said her first word. It was Mama. It was Jacob. It was mine, spoken with quiet certainty as she clutched the little bird carving against her chest. Clara didn't correct her. She just smiled and said, "That's right." Weeks passed. The garden pushed green through blackened soil. The barn frame rose again, stronger this time, with neighbors returning day after day to help without needing to be asked. They brought beams, nails, buckets of milk, laughter. It was no longer Clara's burden alone. It was theirs. And when the roof was finally nailed in place, they celebrated. Not with a feast, there wasn't much to spare, but with music, laughter, and stories told around a fire that didn't burn anything down. Eli carved a new sign for the barn. It read, "Still standing." One afternoon, Clara found him sketching something in the dirt beside the porch, a rough outline of a new room. "Thinking we build a proper space for June," he said, "and maybe one more." He looked up slowly. "In case this family keeps growing." Clara's throat went tight. She crouched beside him and took his hand. "You really think we'll have more?" "I think we already do," he said quietly. It didn't happen fast, not in days or weeks, but slowly, carefully, like all the best things do. June started humming when she drew. Jacob taught her to spell her name with sticks. Eli built a swing from the porch beam. Clara caught herself laughing, not politely or carefully, but with her whole chest. It felt new. It felt old. It felt like something she'd forgotten was hers. But of course, the world doesn't stop turning just because you find peace. And peace doesn't mean immunity from pain. One cold morning, Sheriff Malin arrived with a telegram. "From Denver," he said, handing it over. Clara unfolded it slowly. Her hands began to tremble before she reached the end. Tessa Crow was dead. Typhoid fast alone. She asked for her daughter, Clara whispered, reading the last line. Asked if she'd made it somewhere safe. Jacob stood beside her now. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His hand found hers, small and sure. Later that day, Clara sat June down by the stove and told her everything, as much as she could. She kept her voice even. She didn't cry. She didn't lie. June didn't speak. She just climbed into Clara's lap and stayed there. That night Clara wrote a letter. She didn't know who to send it to. There was no return address, but she wrote it anyway. To Tessa Crow, she's safe. She's loved. She's got a place here. We all do. Thank you for trusting me with her. I won't let her go. Life rolled forward. The garden bloomed in full come summer. Jacob helped Eli build a new chicken coop, and June gathered eggs with a seriousness that made Clara smile every time. The town began planning a harvest fair, just a small one with pie contests and sack races. Clara was asked to judge the baking. "You built half this town's courage," they said. "Might as well taste their bread." The house, once just walls and a dream, now held echoes of laughter, footsteps, singing. June's drawings hung by the door. Jacob's carvings lined the mantel. Eli's coat, so often once hung by the door for a quick departure, now stayed folded at the foot of their shared bed. One evening, Eli knelt beside Clara in the garden. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," he said, "but I look at you and Jacob and June, and I don't think about the past anymore. I just think about staying." Clara took his hand. "You already did." And he had. Through storms, through fire, through the return of the past and the rise of something new. He stayed. So had she. The last board hammered into the barn was etched with initials: JC, JH, JM, EM, CM. 5 names, 1 home. The land was still wild, the nights still long, but the walls stood strong. The windows opened wide, and every board, every nail, every scarred plank told the same story. What had been broken could be rebuilt. Clara stood on the porch one night as the sun slipped behind the hills. June sat on her hip. Jacob lay sprawled on the swing, eyes half closed. Eli leaned in the doorway with a mug in hand. And the wind, for once, was gentle. Not a threat. Just a whisper. Just a promise.